Captain Marcus Thornfield had served the Royal Guard of Valdoria for 15 years, but tonight felt different. The ancient castle corridors echoed with his measured footsteps as he made his way through the shadows, his heart pounding against his chest. Something had been troubling him for weeks now, ever since Queen Isabella's sudden death and the reading of her will. The late queen had been like a mother to Marcus. She had personally recruited him from a small village after his father died serving the crown. Queen Isabella had promised that her vast collection of ancestral jewels and gold would be distributed among the kingdom's orphanages and schools, just as she had always done with her charitable works during her lifetime. But when the will was read, those precious items were mysteriously absent from the document. Marcus knew the castle better than anyone. He had walked these halls during countless night shifts, memorizing every secret passage and hidden door. Tonight he was putting that knowledge to use. Lady Catherine Blackwood, the Queen's sister-in-law, had been acting strangely since the funeral. She had quickly moved into the Queen's former office, claiming she needed to handle the royal finances. But Marcus had noticed something odd during his patrols. Every night for the past week he had seen lights flickering in the office long after Lady Catherine claimed to have retired. He had heard the sound of drawers opening and closing, papers rustling, and what sounded like heavy objects being moved. His instincts, sharpened by years of protecting the royal family, told him something was terribly wrong. As he approached the ornate oak door of the Queen's former office, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The hallway was eerily quiet, with only the distant sound of wind rattling the ancient windows. He had waited until he was certain Lady Catherine had gone to her chambers for the night. The guard rotations would give him exactly 20 minutes before the next patrol came through this wing. Marcus pulled out a small set of tools he had borrowed from the castle locksmith. His hands trembled slightly as he worked on the intricate lock mechanism. The Queen had trusted him with many secrets during her lifetime, but she had never given him access to her private office. He wondered what she would think of him now, breaking into the sacred space where she had spent countless hours planning for the kingdom's future. The lock finally gave way with a soft click that seemed to echo through the corridor like thunder. Marcus paused, listening intently for any sign that someone might have heard. After a few moments of silence, he carefully pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it quietly behind him. The office was bathed in pale moonlight streaming through tall windows. Marcus could make out the familiar silhouette of the Queen's massive desk, the built-in bookshelves that lined the walls, and the portrait of the royal family hanging above the fireplace. Everything looked exactly as it had when Queen Isabella was alive, yet something felt different. There was an energy in the air, as if the room itself was holding secrets. Marcus lit a small candle he had brought with him, being careful to shield the flame so it wouldn't be visible from the corridor. As the warm light filled the space, he began to notice details that made his blood run cold. Several of the desk drawers were slightly ajar, and there were scratches on the wood around the locks that hadn't been there before. Papers were scattered across the desktop, in a way that suggested someone had been searching through them, hastily. But what caught Marcus's attention most was a large painting on the far wall that seemed to be hanging crooked. He remembered that painting well because Queen Isabella had often stood before it during their private conversations, drawing strength from the image of her ancestors. As he approached the painting, Marcus noticed fresh scuff marks on the floor beneath it, as if it had been moved recently. His pulse quickened as he realized what this might mean. The royal family had always been rumored to have hidden safes and secret compartments throughout the castle. Could this painting be concealing something important? Marcus carefully examined the frame and found a small, almost invisible latch hidden behind the ornate gilding. With trembling fingers, he pressed the latch and the painting swung open like a door, revealing a dark cavity in the wall behind it. Marcus held his candle closer and gasped at what he saw. The secret compartment that should have been empty was instead filled with wooden boxes, velvet pouches, and gleaming objects that caught the candlelight like stars. Marcus could barely believe what he was seeing. The hidden compartment contained treasures beyond imagination. Ancient crowns encrusted with diamonds and rubies, necklaces that had belonged to queens from centuries past, and golden chalices that had been used in royal ceremonies for generations. These were the very items that Queen Isabella had intended to sell for charity, the same treasures that had mysteriously disappeared from her will. His hands shook as he reached for one of the velvet pouches. Inside, he found a collection of emerald earrings that he recognized immediately. They had belonged to Queen Isabella's grandmother and were worth enough to feed every hungry child in the kingdom for months. According to the Queen's wishes, these should have been sold weeks ago, with the money already distributed to the orphanages. But here they were, hidden away like stolen goods. Marcus felt a surge of anger mixed with disbelief. Lady Catherine had access to the office, and she was the only person who could have moved these items here. But why would she steal from her own family's charitable legacy? The Queen had trusted her completely, even naming her as the executor of the royal estate. As Marcus examined more of the hidden treasures, he began to understand the scope of what had been taken. There were documents mixed in with the jewelry, papers that looked like property deeds and bank statements. He carefully pulled out a folder and opened it by candlelight. What he read made his stomach turn. The documents showed that Lady Catherine had been selling off pieces of the royal collection for months, even while Queen Isabella was still alive. Bank records indicated large deposits into personal accounts, amounts that matched the estimated values of missing royal artifacts. There were also letters from art dealers and jewelry merchants, discussing private sales and confidential transactions. Marcus realized he was looking at evidence of a carefully planned theft that had been going on for much longer than he had imagined. Lady Catherine hadn't just taken the inheritance meant for charity. She had been systematically stealing from the royal family while pretending to manage their finances. The Queen had died never knowing that her trusted sister-in-law was robbing her blind. Among the papers, Marcus found something that made his blood freeze. It was a letter in Lady Catherine's handwriting, addressed to a mysterious contact referred to only as the broker. In the letter, she discussed plans to accelerate the timeline and mentioned that the old woman's death creates new opportunities. The cold, calculating tone of the letter suggested that Lady Catherine saw Queen Isabella's death not as a tragedy, but as a business opportunity. Marcus was so absorbed in reading the documents that he almost didn't hear the soft footsteps in the corridor outside. But his years of military training kicked in, and he instantly blew out his candle and pressed himself against the wall beside the secret compartment. The footsteps were getting closer, and he could hear the soft rustle of fabric that suggested someone in nightclothes was approaching. The door handle turned slowly, and Marcus held his breath as the office door creaked open. In the moonlight, he could make out the silhouette of Lady Catherine herself, wearing a dark robe and carrying a small oil lamp. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going and what she was looking for. Marcus watched in horror as Lady Catherine walked directly to the crooked painting, completely unaware of his presence in the shadows. She seemed agitated, muttering under her breath about missing documents and foolish mistakes. As she approached the secret compartment, Marcus realized that she must have discovered that something was wrong with her hiding place. Lady Catherine set down her lamp and began examining the contents of the compartment. Marcus could hear her sharp intake of breath as she realized that some of the papers had been disturbed. She began frantically searching through the documents, her movements becoming more frantic with each passing moment. From his hiding spot, Marcus could see that Lady Catherine was now in full panic mode. She was pulling out papers and jewelry, checking to make sure everything was still there. Her face, illuminated by the lamplight, showed a mixture of fear and rage that Marcus had never seen before. This was not the composed, dignified lady who had comforted the royal family during their time of grief. This was someone desperate and dangerous. As Lady Catherine continued her frantic search, Marcus began to understand that he was witnessing something much bigger than simple theft. The way she handled the documents suggested that she was part of a larger operation, possibly involving other members of the royal court or outside criminal organizations. The stakes were higher than he had imagined, and his discovery had put him in serious danger. Marcus knew he needed to get out of the office immediately, but Lady Catherine was blocking his only escape route. He was trapped in the shadows with evidence of a massive conspiracy, watching as the perpetrator realized that her crimes had been discovered. The next few minutes would determine whether he would live to expose the truth or become another victim of Lady Catherine's deadly ambition. Lady Catherine suddenly stopped her frantic searching and stood perfectly still. Marcus could see her head turning slowly as she scanned the dark office, her instincts apparently telling her that she was not alone. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, with only the sound of both their hearts beating in the darkness. Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadows, trying to control his breathing. He still had some of the stolen documents clutched in his hand, evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy. But if Lady Catherine discovered him now, he knew she would do whatever it took to protect her secret. People who could steal from dying queens were capable of anything. After what felt like an eternity, Lady Catherine seemed to convince herself that she was imagining things. She returned to the secret compartment and began hastily repacking the treasures and documents. But Marcus noticed that she was being much more careful now, organizing everything in a way that would make it obvious if someone had disturbed them again. As she worked, Lady Catherine began speaking to herself in a low, bitter voice that revealed the depth of her resentment. She talked about years of watching Queen Isabella receive praise for her charity work, while the royal family's debts mounted. She complained about being treated like a servant despite her noble birth, forced to manage the dreary details of royal finances while others received the glory. Marcus listened in shock as Lady Catherine revealed that she had been planning this theft for years, waiting for the right opportunity to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. In her twisted thinking, she was not stealing from the kingdom's orphans and schools. She was simply taking payment for years of thankless work. The Queen's death had merely provided the perfect cover for accelerating her plans. But what chilled Marcus most was when Lady Catherine mentioned other people who were getting suspicious and might need to be dealt with permanently. She spoke about a young accountant who had been asking too many questions about missing funds, and a palace servant who had seen her moving heavy boxes late at night. The way she talked about these people made it clear that their lives were in danger. As Lady Catherine finished reorganizing the secret compartment, she pulled out a small leather journal and began writing by lamplight. Marcus could see her making notes about security weaknesses in the castle and plans for moving the remaining treasures to a safer location. She was clearly preparing to escalate her operation, possibly involving violence against anyone who threatened to expose her. When Lady Catherine finally closed the secret compartment and prepared to leave, Marcus thought his ordeal was over. But as she reached the office door, she suddenly turned back and walked directly toward the shadows where he was hiding. His heart nearly stopped as he realized that she might have spotted him after all. Lady Catherine stopped just a few feet away from Marcus and began examining the area around his hiding spot. She seemed to be looking for evidence that someone had been there, checking for footprints or disturbed dust. Marcus could smell her perfume and see the cold calculation in her eyes as she searched for signs of an intruder. For a terrifying moment, their eyes met in the darkness. Marcus was certain he had been discovered, and he tensed his muscles, preparing to fight for his life. But Lady Catherine's gaze passed over him without recognition, the deep shadows providing just enough concealment to keep him hidden. Satisfied that she was alone, Lady Catherine finally left the office, locking the door carefully behind her. Marcus waited in the darkness for several more minutes, listening to her footsteps fade away down the corridor. Only when he was certain she was gone did he dare to move from his hiding spot. Marcus knew that time was running out. Lady Catherine would probably move the treasures within the next day or two, and the people she had mentioned were in immediate danger. He had to act quickly, but he also had to be smart about it. Lady Catherine clearly had connections throughout the castle, and he didn't know who else might be involved in the conspiracy. As he prepared to leave the office, Marcus made a crucial decision. Instead of taking all the evidence with him, he would photograph the most important documents using a small camera he kept for official investigations. This way, he would have proof of the conspiracy, even if Lady Catherine moved everything before he could return. Working quickly by moonlight, Marcus documented as many papers as possible, focusing on the bank records, the letters to mysterious contacts, and the lists of stolen items. Each photograph was a piece of evidence that could bring down not just Lady Catherine, but potentially an entire network of criminals who had been robbing the royal family. But as Marcus prepared to leave through the office door, he heard something that made his blood run cold. There were footsteps in the corridor again, but this time they belonged to multiple people moving with military precision. Lady Catherine had not come back alone. She had brought reinforcements, and they were surrounding the office. Marcus realized he was trapped. Through the keyhole, he could see shadows moving in the hallway as Lady Catherine's accomplices took positions around the office. He heard her voice giving quiet orders, instructing her allies to watch all exits and be prepared for violence. She had clearly figured out that someone had been in the office and she was taking no chances. The gravity of his situation hit Marcus like a physical blow. These were not random criminals. They moved with the discipline of trained soldiers or guards. Lady Catherine had corrupted members of the Royal Security Force itself, turning the very people sworn to protect the crown into thieves and potentially murderers. The conspiracy was far deeper than he had imagined. Marcus frantically searched his memory of the castle layout, trying to remember if there were any alternative exits from the Queen's office. Then he remembered something from his early days of service. Queen Isabella had once mentioned that her office was connected to the old servant passages that ran throughout the castle walls. These hidden corridors had been used centuries ago to allow staff to move through the castle without disturbing the royal family. Moving carefully in the darkness, Marcus began feeling along the walls, searching for any sign of a hidden door or panel. His fingers traced the intricate wood paneling, looking for loose boards or concealed latches. Time was running out. He could hear Lady Catherine and her men testing the office door, preparing to enter. Finally, behind a tall bookshelf filled with the Queen's favorite novels, Marcus found what he was looking for. His fingers detected a slight gap in the paneling, and when he pressed against it, a narrow section of the wall swung inward. The passage beyond was pitch black and filled with the musty smell of centuries-old dust, but it represented his only chance of escape. Marcus squeezed through the narrow opening just as he heard the office door being unlocked. As he pulled the secret panel closed behind him, he could see lamplight beginning to fill the office as Lady Catherine and her accomplices entered. He had escaped with seconds to spare, but he was now trapped in a maze of forgotten passages with no clear idea of how to get out. The servant corridors were even more confusing than Marcus had expected. They branched off in multiple directions, with some passages leading to dead ends and others opening into rooms he didn't recognize. The air was thick and stale, making it difficult to breathe, and the complete darkness meant he had to feel his way along the walls step by step. As he navigated the labyrinth, Marcus could hear muffled voices from the office behind him. Lady Catherine was clearly furious, shouting at her accomplices about their failure to catch the intruder. He heard furniture being moved and walls being searched as they looked for the secret passage he had used. It would only be a matter of time before they found the hidden door. But Marcus had a more immediate problem. As he felt his way deeper into the passage system, he began to realize that he was not alone in the walls. There were sounds coming from ahead of him, soft movements that suggested someone else was using the old corridors. His heart raced as he considered the possibilities. Either Lady Catherine had men stationed in the passages, or there was another player in this deadly game. Marcus pressed himself against the wall and listened carefully. The sounds were rhythmic, like someone walking with purpose rather than searching randomly. Whoever was in the passages with him knew exactly where they were going. This suggested that the secret corridors were being used regularly, possibly as part of Lady Catherine's smuggling operation. As the footsteps approached, Marcus realized he had no choice but to confront whoever was coming. He was carrying evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy, but he was also unarmed and outnumbered. If Lady Catherine's men found him in the narrow confines of the passages, he would have no room to maneuver or escape. The footsteps stopped just around a corner from Marcus's position. He could hear someone breathing heavily, as if they had been running. Then to his surprise, he heard a familiar voice whisper his name. It was Sarah Mitchell, one of the young palace accountants who had been asking questions about the missing funds. Marcus cautiously moved toward the voice and found Sarah crouched in an intersection of 3 passages. Her face was pale with fear, and she was clutching a bundle of papers to her chest. When she saw Marcus, relief flooded her features, but she quickly gestured for him to remain quiet. In hurried whispers, Sarah explained that she had been investigating the financial discrepancies for weeks. She had discovered that large amounts of money were being transferred from royal accounts to unknown destinations. When she tried to report her findings to Lady Catherine, she had been told to stop asking questions and focus on her regular duties. But Sarah was persistent. She had continued her investigation in secret, following the money trail through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. What she had discovered was staggering. Lady Catherine was not just stealing individual treasures, but had been systematically embezzling funds from the royal treasury for years. The theft of Queen Isabella's inheritance was just the latest phase of a massive financial conspiracy. Sarah had been planning to take her evidence to the Royal Inspector General in the morning, but Lady Catherine had apparently discovered her investigation. Tonight, armed men had come to Sarah's quarters, forcing her to flee through the servant passages she had discovered during her research. Like Marcus, she was now a fugitive in her own workplace, hunted by criminals who had infiltrated the highest levels of the royal administration. Marcus and Sarah huddled together in the darkness, combining their evidence and trying to understand the full scope of the conspiracy they had uncovered. Sarah's financial records showed that the theft had been going on for nearly 3 years, with millions of royal funds disappearing into private accounts. Marcus's photographs revealed the physical evidence of stolen treasures and the network of criminal contacts that Lady Catherine was using to sell the royal artifacts. Together, they realized that Queen Isabella's death had not been the beginning of the conspiracy, but rather its culmination. Lady Catherine had been waiting for the Queen to die so she could claim the most valuable pieces of the royal collection, without interference. The charitable donations mentioned in the Queen's will had provided the perfect cover story, allowing Lady Catherine to remove treasures from public view under the pretense of preparing them for sale to benefit the poor. But as they studied the evidence, Sarah pointed out something even more disturbing. The timeline of financial transfers showed that large payments had been made to unknown recipients just days before Queen Isabella's death. Combined with the suspicious circumstances of the Queen's sudden illness, this raised the horrifying possibility that Lady Catherine had not simply waited for the Queen to die naturally. Marcus felt sick as he considered the implications. Queen Isabella had been in perfect health until the week before her death, when she had suddenly fallen ill with symptoms that the royal physicians couldn't explain. If Lady Catherine was capable of murder, then no one in the castle was safe. They needed to get their evidence to trustworthy authorities before more people died. Sarah knew of a secret exit from the servant passages that led to the castle's old wine cellars. From there, they could reach the main courtyard and hopefully make contact with loyal guards who were not part of Lady Catherine's conspiracy. But the journey through the passages would be dangerous, especially since Lady Catherine's men were now actively searching the corridors. As they began moving toward the wine cellars, Marcus and Sarah could hear sounds of pursuit behind them. Lady Catherine had indeed found the secret door in the office, and her accomplices were now spreading through the passage system with torches and weapons. The hunt was on, and the stakes could not be higher. The old passages were treacherous even without the threat of armed pursuers. Many sections had partially collapsed over the centuries, forcing Marcus and Sarah to crawl through tight spaces or climb over piles of rubble. The air grew thicker as they descended toward the castle's foundations, and several times they had to stop and rest to avoid passing out from lack of oxygen. But the worst part was the growing realization that they were being herded toward a trap. The sounds of pursuit seemed to be driving them in a specific direction, as if Lady Catherine's men knew exactly where they were going. Marcus began to suspect that Sarah's secret exit might not be as secret as she thought, and that they were walking directly into the hands of their enemies. His suspicions were confirmed when they reached the wine cellars and found armed men waiting for them. Lady Catherine herself was there, no longer bothering to maintain her facade of noble dignity. She looked at Marcus and Sarah with cold hatred, her elegant features twisted by greed and desperation. Lady Catherine revealed that she had known about Sarah's investigation for weeks and had been using the young accountant as an unwitting tool to identify other potential threats to her operation. Sarah's research had helped Lady Catherine understand exactly what evidence existed against her, allowing her to plan her next moves accordingly. As for Marcus, Lady Catherine explained that his reputation for loyalty and integrity had made him a predictable target. She had suspected that he would eventually stumble onto her operation, so she had prepared contingency plans for dealing with him. The crooked painting and obvious signs of disturbance in the office had been deliberate bait, designed to lure him into investigating further. Now that both Marcus and Sarah were captured, Lady Catherine revealed the final phase of her plan. The stolen treasures would be moved out of the kingdom within the next 24 hours, using diplomatic pouches and cargo ships that would be immune from official searches. The money trail would be covered by a convenient fire in the royal archives that would destroy all financial records from the past 5 years. But Marcus and Sarah would not live to see any of this. Lady Catherine could not risk letting them survive with knowledge of her crimes. Their deaths would be staged to look like an accident, perhaps a tragic collapse in the old wine cellars that claimed two dedicated royal servants who had been working late to serve the crown. As Lady Catherine's men moved to restrain them, Marcus realized that their only hope lay in creating enough chaos to escape in the confusion. He still had his guard training and knowledge of the castle's layout, while Sarah had proven herself resourceful and brave. If they could work together and take advantage of their captor's overconfidence, they might still have a chance to expose the conspiracy and save the kingdom from these thieves and murderers. Marcus caught Sarah's eye and saw that she understood what he was planning. Years of military training had taught him to recognize opportunities in seemingly hopeless situations. Lady Catherine's overconfidence was her weakness. She was so certain of victory that she had allowed her guard to drop just enough to give them a chance. The wine cellar was filled with ancient barrels and bottles that could be used as weapons or distractions. Marcus also noticed that several of the old wine racks were unstable, held in place by rotting wooden supports that wouldn't take much force to collapse. If he could create enough chaos, he and Sarah might be able to escape in the darkness and confusion. Marcus suddenly lunged toward the nearest wine rack, using his full body weight to topple the massive wooden structure. Hundreds of bottles crashed to the stone floor in an explosion of glass and wine, while the heavy wooden beams came crashing down on Lady Catherine's men. In the chaos that followed, Sarah grabbed a broken bottle and used it to cut the ropes that had been binding their hands. But Lady Catherine was quicker to recover than Marcus had expected. Even as her men scrambled to avoid the falling debris, she drew a small pistol from beneath her robes and aimed it directly at Marcus. Her face was a mask of cold fury, as she realized that her carefully laid plans were falling apart at the crucial moment. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the wine cellar like thunder, but Marcus had anticipated Lady Catherine's move and thrown himself to the side at the last second. The bullet shattered another wine bottle inches from his head, spraying him with glass fragments and ancient wine. He rolled behind a stone pillar just as Lady Catherine fired again. Sarah had used the distraction to grab one of the fallen torches, and she began swinging it at Lady Catherine's remaining men, forcing them to back away from the flames. The combination of fire, broken glass, and spilled wine had turned the cellar into a battlefield where neither side could gain a clear advantage. But Marcus knew they couldn't win a prolonged fight. Lady Catherine had more men, better weapons, and reinforcements could arrive at any moment. Their only chance was to reach the exit that Sarah had mentioned, and get their evidence to trustworthy authorities before Lady Catherine could complete her escape plan. As Marcus and Sarah fought their way toward the cellar stairs, Lady Catherine shouted orders to her men, directing them to block all possible escape routes. She was no longer trying to stage their deaths as an accident. She simply wanted them dead as quickly as possible. The mask of civilization had fallen away completely, revealing the ruthless criminal beneath. Marcus managed to reach the stairs first, but as he turned to help Sarah, he saw that she had been cornered by two of Lady Catherine's men. One of them had grabbed her arm and was trying to drag her back into the depths of the cellar, while the other advanced with a drawn sword. Sarah was fighting bravely with her makeshift torch, but she was clearly outmatched. Without hesitation, Marcus charged back into the fray, using a broken wine barrel as a shield and weapon. He struck down one of Sarah's attackers and grabbed his sword, evening the odds in their desperate battle. But as they fought, Marcus could hear more footsteps on the stairs above them. Lady Catherine's reinforcements were arriving. The situation was becoming hopeless when Sarah suddenly remembered something crucial about the wine cellar's layout. During her research into the castle's financial records, she had discovered that the old cellars connected to a network of drainage tunnels that led directly to the river outside the castle walls. These tunnels had been forgotten for decades, but they might still be passable. Sarah shouted directions to Marcus over the sounds of battle, guiding him toward a narrow opening hidden behind a stack of empty barrels. The opening was barely large enough for a person to crawl through, but it was their only remaining chance of escape. As Marcus cleared the barrels away, he could see a dark tunnel stretching away into the unknown. Lady Catherine realized what they were attempting and screamed at her men to stop them at all costs. She fired her pistol again, this time hitting Marcus in the shoulder and spinning him around. Blood began flowing from the wound, but adrenaline kept him moving as he pushed Sarah toward the tunnel entrance. Sarah crawled into the drainage tunnel first, still clutching the precious evidence they had gathered. Marcus followed close behind, his injured shoulder making it difficult to pull himself along the narrow stone passage. Behind them, they could hear Lady Catherine's men trying to follow, but the tunnel was too small for armed adults to navigate quickly. As they crawled through the ancient drainage system, Marcus and Sarah could hear the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them, but they also faced new dangers in the tunnel itself. The stonework was crumbling in places, and sections of the passage were partially flooded with stagnant water that had accumulated over the decades. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, testing their endurance and resolve with each difficult meter. Marcus's wounded shoulder was bleeding heavily, and Sarah was exhausted from their ordeal in the wine cellar. But they pressed on, knowing that Lady Catherine would not give up the hunt easily, and that their evidence was the only thing standing between the kingdom and a massive theft that would impoverish thousands of innocent people. After what felt like hours of crawling through the narrow drainage tunnel, Marcus and Sarah finally saw a glimmer of moonlight ahead. The tunnel emerged at a hidden outlet along the riverbank, concealed behind a curtain of hanging willow branches. They pulled themselves out of the ancient stonework and collapsed on the muddy shore, gasping for breath and grateful to be alive. But their ordeal was far from over. Marcus's shoulder wound needed immediate attention, and they both knew that Lady Catherine would soon discover their escape route and send men to search the riverbank. They had perhaps an hour's head start before the hunt would resume in earnest. Sarah helped Marcus bind his wound with strips torn from her dress, while they planned their next move. They needed to reach someone in authority who was definitely not part of Lady Catherine's conspiracy, but everyone they could think of might already be compromised. The corruption clearly reached high into the royal administration, making it dangerous to trust anyone without proof of their loyalty. Marcus suggested they try to reach General Harrison, the commander of the Royal Guard who had personally recruited Marcus years ago. Harrison was known throughout the kingdom for his unwavering integrity and had served the crown faithfully for over 30 years. If anyone could be trusted with their evidence, it would be him. But General Harrison's residence was on the other side of the capital city, and Marcus was in no condition for a long journey on foot. They would need to find transportation while avoiding Lady Catherine's search parties, a nearly impossible task given their disheveled appearance and Marcus's obvious injury. Fortune smiled on them when they encountered an old fisherman preparing his boat for an early morning trip downriver. The man recognized Marcus from his visits to the docks during royal security inspections, and was shocked to see the respected guard captain wounded and fleeing through the night. When Marcus briefly explained that he was carrying evidence of crimes against the crown, the fisherman immediately offered his assistance. The boat journey downriver allowed Marcus and Sarah to rest while putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. As dawn broke over the kingdom, they could see search parties combing the riverbanks behind them, but the boat's early start had given them a crucial advantage. Lady Catherine's men were looking for fugitives on foot, not passengers on a fishing vessel. When they reached the city, the fishermen helped them reach General Harrison's residence through back streets and market alleys that avoided the main thoroughfares where Lady Catherine's agents might be watching. The general was initially skeptical of their wild story, but his attitude changed dramatically when he examined the evidence they had gathered. General Harrison immediately summoned his most trusted officers and began organizing a raid on the castle to apprehend Lady Catherine and her accomplices. But when the soldiers arrived at the Queen's office, they found it empty, except for a note addressed to Marcus. Lady Catherine had anticipated that they might escape and expose her crimes, so she had activated her emergency evacuation plan. The note explained that Lady Catherine and her stolen treasures were already aboard a ship bound for a distant kingdom where she had purchased citizenship and immunity from prosecution. She taunted Marcus and Sarah for their efforts, claiming that she would live in luxury while they dealt with the aftermath of her crimes. But Lady Catherine had underestimated the thoroughness of Sarah's financial investigation. Among the evidence Sarah had gathered were records showing which ships Lady Catherine had been using for her smuggling operations. General Harrison immediately dispatched the Royal Navy to intercept these vessels before they could reach international waters. The dramatic sea chase that followed became legendary throughout the kingdom. Lady Catherine's ship was faster than the naval vessels pursuing it, but she was carrying too much weight in stolen gold and jewelry to outrun them for long. When the Royal Navy finally caught up with her ship, Lady Catherine tried to dump the evidence overboard rather than face justice. But the sailors were ready for this tactic, and they managed to recover most of the stolen treasures from the water. Lady Catherine herself was captured and brought back to face trial for her crimes against the crown and the people of the kingdom. The trial revealed the full extent of Lady Catherine's conspiracy